Okay, this talk is about titles. And specifically, right, we're going to, for Studio 2, you're going to design book covers. So it's really any text. Besides titles, it has, if you're doing a poster, just any of the information on it. In your book cover, you'll have not only the book title, there might be a subtitle. There also is an author name. So the first slide here, right here, this is a really boring default title, right? I just clicked, put a piece of text here, typed it out, let it go, made no choices other than maybe the size and just made it really big, and that's it, and just left it black. So that's obviously super boring. We as designers, it's our job to then take this and do something more interesting with it. So that was the defaults. And I say one of the keys to this class is just never having defaults of software or thinking. Never just leave that, right? The software always has some kind of default settings, right? Black text, white background, even the typography that's there, whatever type is chosen right when you do it. So we never want to use these defaults. Unless there's a really good reason to, but obviously. So let's talk about all the design choices, because really to design means to plan, right? It's design is nothing but a series of choices. And so you have to be aware of all your choices. And so for text our first design choice, besides obviously the typeface and things like that, is casing. And we can type things in regular case, right? Sentence case, where you just capitalize the first thing and none others. You could capitalize all words. You could do things in all lowercase. You can do things in all uppercase. But there's actually one more casing that you may not be aware of, and that's a specific graphic design casing called title casing. And title casing is interesting that we capitalize certain things and we don't capitalize other certain things. And so what doesn't get capitalized? Articles such as a, an, or the, conjunctions such as and, but, or, and short prepositions on, in, with. Now, if they start the title, you capitalize it because it's the first word, like a sentence, right? If you're not sure, there's actually something online called Title Case Converter where you could type your title in and get title casing output. The biggest choice, I think, for doing multi-line text is how you break the text, where you put these breaks in. Because when you just pull out a type box or something, and by default, and you just start typing it in, right? The computer's making those choices of how to break those. But that's absolutely not what you want to do as designer. Maybe sometimes with paragraphs of text. But when you're talking about short text, headlines, the small information stuff like on posters and our book cover information, you absolutely want to be very intentional with the way you break your lines. And so how do we want to break these lines? Well, you want to strive for balanced widths, right? We don't want a very tiny thing and a very long thing against each other, right? So this is nice because this example shows you a bunch of things going on. Another thing you want to break for when you're talking about especially big, like scannable text, is you want to break them into sense. So I call it breaking for sense. So the more you listen, the better it gets. There should be an S there. But right, so each of those phrases on its own, if this had an S, kind of sort of makes sense. You're not always going to be able to make them make sense, but at least they'll feel a little more joined together than if you just said, the more you listen, the better it gets, right? So obviously that these don't feel like good phrases. They don't make a lot of sense. Another thing you should never do is trap a word after punctuation. So this one has this the trapped after that punctuation. A natural break is the punctuation. So at the comma, putting the break in. So these are all the things that you have to think about, right? You don't just simply type it out and however it goes, that's how it is. That is absolutely not how we do headlines and larger texts in graphic design. And just as an example, when I was making this slideshow, I had just pulled out, a text box and wrote, this is a title with title casing on that slide you saw before. But I was like, well, this width over here, makes this a little longer. It doesn't make sense. So I just simply put a soft return in. So I don't know if you know, but in most design software, if you hold Shift and hit return, it's called a soft return. And so it doesn't start a new like paragraph context or anything. It just breaks it down to the next line. So that's something you can use. Another design choice is alignment, right? And for this, in graphic design too, we talk a lot about various axes for aligning text within typography. But for us, we're just going to stick with our three basics, right? Central alignment, left alignment, and right alignment, right? Those give us a place where the text emanates from. With left and right alignment, we get a strong line, either on the left or right. So left is the most common place, obviously, because in Western cultures we read left to right, and so that would be the most common. Right adds a different flavor. It's something we're not as used to, so it's never used for long text, but we can use it in shorter things. And center is nice because it provides us with a symmetry, so it's really stable. At the same time, it's only good for casual reading because we never know where a line gets together. There's actually another alignment I'm not talking about called justified, and that's where we would really make it align on both right and left. And so you'd be able to do that. And sometimes you want to do, like if we wanted to make this justified, I'd have to make this waters larger, right? So it would take up a larger area, and this Bellary, whatever it says, would have to go a little larger too. The one thing I don't want you to do for exercise 8 is to use any kind of a casual alignment. Again, this is a class on basics. There are alignments called transitional and random casual alignments that I do talk about in the advanced graphic design class when we explore something called deconstructivism. But for this class, I absolutely don't want you to do anything like this. I want you to stick with strong alignments. Another thing that we can do is, right, we don't have to just use one single style within a headline or something like that, a title. We can change size, typeface, weight, color, style, orientation, adornment. So if we see here, right, this one carried by Faith, right? Faith is very different than carried. Even here in the subtitle, right, we have uppercase and darker for these words that we want to kind of put together. And even this winds up because of the color. It's like faith, substance, abuse, and miracles. It becomes like a scan that I can get of that, right? And then the other stuff seems to be like extra. And that could be good. In this one, we have, right, these have different orientations, and this is larger, even though they're the same typeface. So really you have any type of variable you can change within your typeface. And when we're doing this, a lot of times we're doing one of two things. The first thing I call punching, right? You want to take a word or a phrase and make it stand out, just like faith is obviously the keyword in this one over here. Garlic is the keyword in this one right here. I saw this, I took a picture of this. This was from something in the School of Journalism, and this was just another way of punching. They actually used enclosure, right, to kind of get this influential legacy rise, which is different than this, right? Kind of a separation, a punch. This one works a little differently than these are a lot more punchy. This one works slightly different. But another reason why we would change our styles is to de-emphasize words. And specifically the words we usually de-emphasize are what I call the junk words. So these are our words, like even in title casing, we wind up not capitalizing them. So something like to, from waitress to world traveler, right? Like this is kind of a minor word, so kind of a junk word. We make it a little differently. In the, right, we could de-punch that, make them smaller, things like that, right? So these junk words generally are a place where we de-emphasize these words because they're not as important. Even the way we read, we actually don't read every letter. Sometimes we don't even read every word, right? We scan a lot. We want a person to be able to pretty much get the main words, and most of the times in our minds we can actually place those words in without really fully reading them. And that's why we're able to de-emphasize those in the design. So that's our talk on this. I'm going to record a separate video on then how do we put type over images.